Little Jeannie found herself alone on the cold stone steps of her home, abandoned by the one who should have cared for her. The night was dark and cold as Jeannie sat on the stone steps outside her father's house. Her small body trembled as the wind blew through the trees, sending chills straight to her bones. She clutched her knees to her chest, trying to stay warm in her thin, torn dress. The door behind her was shut tightly, and she knew it wouldn't open for her tonight. Her stepmother Mansa had locked her out again. Jenny didn't cry because she knew if Mansa saw her tears, things would only get worse. This wasn't the first time Jeannie had been cast out into the night, and sadly, it wouldn't be the last. Mansa had sent her out this time for something as small as dropping a piece of bread at dinner. That was all it took for Mansa to lose her temper. Jeannie knew better than to beg or plead. It wouldn't change anything. Mansa's mind was made up. The best Jeannie could do was wait outside and hope for the morning to come quickly. As Jeannie sat shivering in the cold, memories of her life before Mansa filled her head. Things hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Jeannie had felt safe and loved, back when it was just her and her father, Dan. He had always been her world. She adored him, and the bond between them was strong. Her mother and father were not together anymore. Her dad had met Mansa and married her, a decision that had shattered Jeannie's world. This had pushed Jeannie's mother to leave, but Jeannie, so attached to her father, had refused to go with her mom. Jeannie loved her father more than anything, and believed staying with him was the right choice. She thought they could still be happy, even with Mansa in their lives. But Mansa was not what Jenny had hoped for. When Dan wasn't home, Mansa became someone else entirely. Gone were the sweet smiles and gentle words. Instead, Mansa was harsh and cruel, finding any excuse to punish Jeannie. The first time she had hit Jeannie, it was for speaking out of turn during a conversation. The sting of the cane on Jeannie's legs had shocked her, but even worse was the look in Mansa's eyes, cold, filled with hatred. That look haunted Jeannie now as she sat on the steps, trying to hold back her tears. Dan, blinded by love for his new wife, didn't see what was happening. Mansa was always careful to hide her cruel side when he was around. When Dan was home, Mansa acted like a loving stepmother, cooking meals and showing Jeannie fake affection. Jeannie had tried to tell her father about Mansa's mean behavior, but he didn't believe her. He trusted Mansa and couldn't imagine her being unkind to his daughter. "You must be mistaken," he would say, brushing off Jeannie's concerns. Jeannie's heart ached as she thought about her father's disbelief. She missed the days when he used to tuck her in at night, telling her stories about the stars and their ancestors. Those were the days when Jeannie felt cherished, when her father was her protector. But now he was distant, caught up in his work and too trusting of Mansa. That night, Dan wasn't home to protect her. He had traveled on a business trip, leaving Jeannie alone with Mansa. And Mansa, once again, had taken out her frustrations on the little girl. After dinner, Mansa had given Jeannie several strokes of the cane, each one more painful than the last. Jeannie's legs still ached from the punishment. Then, as if the beating wasn't enough, Mansa had shoved Jeannie out the door into the freezing night. Jeannie tried to stay warm, but the cold was unbearable. The wind cut through her dress, and her body shook uncontrollably. She glanced up at the sky, wishing her father would come back and take her in his arms like he used to, but she knew he wouldn't return until the next day. She was alone. As the night dragged on, Jeannie's body grew weaker. Her tiny arms couldn't hold back the cold, and her breathing became shallow. She tried to stay awake, but exhaustion began to pull her under. Her eyelids grew heavy, and slowly, without realizing it, she drifted off to sleep on the stone steps. The next morning, when people found Jeannie, she wasn't breathing. The cold had taken her life. Little Jeannie was gone. Her death sent shockwaves through the village. No one could believe that such a small, innocent girl had been left outside in the freezing cold. The villagers were heartbroken. Jeannie's life had ended far too soon, and the circumstances surrounding her death were tragic. Many in the village whispered about the things Jeannie had said before her passing. She had complained to her father several times about Mansa's cruel treatment, but Dan had never taken her seriously. He had always found it hard to believe, because Mansa acted so kind when he was around. But now, people wondered if Mansa had been hiding her true self from Dan all along. As the news of Jeannie's death spread, the village chief called for a meeting. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces filled with sorrow and disbelief. The chief, a wise and respected man, addressed the crowd with a heavy heart. "We cannot allow this tragedy to go unpunished," he said firmly. "It is our duty to protect our children and ensure that such cruelty does not happen again." The villagers murmured in agreement, their anger growing. They all knew Mansa had played a role in Jenny's suffering, and they were determined to hold her accountable. The chief proposed that they confront Mansa and demand justice for Jenny. A group of brave villagers went to Mansa's home, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and determination. They knocked on the door, and when Mansa opened it, her expression changed from surprise to anger. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice dripping with disdain. "We're here for Jenny," one villager said, stepping forward. "You must answer for what you did." Mansa scoffed, her eyes narrowing. That girl was a nuisance. She deserved what she got. At that moment, the chief arrived, his presence commanding attention. "Mansa, we demand you come with us to the village square," he ordered. "You must face the consequences of your actions." Mansa's bravado faltered as she realized the gravity of the situation. The villagers surrounded her, their faces filled with resolve. They marched her to the square where more villagers had gathered, all eager for justice. Once in the square, the chief addressed the crowd. "This woman has caused untold pain to an innocent child," he declared. "We cannot allow her to escape unpunished. Jeannie's life was precious and her suffering must not be in vain." The villagers shouted their agreement, their voices rising in unison. "Justice for Jenny! Justice for Jeannie!" Mansa stood there, her bravado slipping away as she faced the wrath of the community. The chief continued, "Mansa, your cruel treatment of Jenny has been exposed. You will face a punishment fitting your crimes." As the crowd murmured, the chief announced her punishment. Mansa would be banished from the village, forced to live in isolation for a period of time to reflect on her actions. The villagers agreed that she would also have to provide reparations to Jenny's family, contributing to a fund to support vulnerable children in the village. Mansa's face turned pale. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, but her protests fell on deaf ears. The villagers were resolute in their decision, and the chief's voice rang out over the crowd. "Let this be a lesson to all who think they can harm our children without consequence." The villagers watched as Mansa was led away, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over them. They knew that no punishment could bring back Jenny, but they hoped it would prevent further tragedies in the future. As the days passed, the village mourned Jenny's death. Dan returned home, devastated and guilt-ridden. When he learned of Mansa's punishment and the events that had transpired, he felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had failed to protect his daughter, and now she was gone forever. The villagers supported each other through their grief, and many began to reflect on their own responsibilities to the children in their care. They held gatherings to discuss how they could create a safer environment for all children, ensuring that no one else would suffer as Jeannie had. Dan often visited Jeannie's grave, a small plot near the village's central well. He would sit there for hours, lost in thought, replaying moments from their past. He remembered her laughter, her bright smile, and the way her eyes sparkled with joy. He vowed to honor her memory by being a better father to those still in need, by listening to their voices and protecting them from harm. Over time, the village began to heal, but Jeannie's story remained etched in their hearts. They established a community center dedicated to children where they could gather, learn, and find support. The center became a place of love and safety, a testament to Jeannie's legacy. Villagers shared Jeannie's story with their children, teaching them the importance of speaking out against injustice and standing up for one another. They emphasized that it was crucial to listen when someone expressed their fears or concerns, no matter how small they seemed. Dan took on a role in the community center, volunteering his time to help the children. He listened to their stories and provided guidance, ensuring that they felt heard and valued. He hoped that by being present, he could prevent another tragedy like Jeannie's from ever happening again. As years passed, the village flourished. The community center became a beacon of hope, drawing in children from all around. They participated in activities, learned important life skills, and forged lasting friendships. The villagers took pride in nurturing the next generation, understanding that their collective responsibility was to create a safe and loving environment for all children. On the anniversary of Janie's death, the village held a memorial in her honor. They decorated the community center with flowers, and everyone gathered to share their memories of Jenny. Dan spoke to the crowd, his voice trembling with emotion. "Janie may be gone, but her spirit lives on in each of us," he said. "Let us remember her not just in our grief, but in our actions. We must protect and cherish every child in our village." The villagers nodded, tears in their eyes as they listened to Dan's heartfelt words. They lit candles in Jenny's memory, their flames flickering in the gentle breeze as a symbol of hope and resilience. Together, they made a promise to honor her legacy by fostering love, kindness, and safety in their community. Rest in peace, Jeannie. Your story will not be forgotten, and we hope that others will learn from the tragedy of your short life. You may have been taken from us too soon, but your spirit lives on in the hearts of those you touched.